In the tranquil suburbs of Melbourne, Australia, where manicured lawns and picket fences paint a picture of domestic bliss, the Lawson family appear to have achieved the quintessential Australian dream. James Lawson, a charismatic and successful real estate agent in his early 40s, lived in a sprawling two-story home on Eucalyptus Drive with his wife of 15 years, Sarah, and their two children, Emma and Liam. The family was well known in the community, often hosting neighborhood barbecues and participating in local charity events. Their seemingly perfect life was the envy of many, but as we'll soon discover, appearances can be devastatingly deceptive. James had always been the golden boy of the Lawson family. With his sharp mind for business and his easy charm, he had quickly climbed the ranks in the competitive Melbourne real estate market. By the age of 35, he was managing his own agency, Lawson Properties, which had become one of the most successful in the city. His younger brother, Michael, lived just a few blocks away and was a constant presence in the Lawson household. Michael, unlike James, had struggled to find his footing in life. He bounced from job to job, never quite settling into a career, but his warm personality and devotion to his niece and nephew made him a beloved uncle and brother. Sarah Lawson, née Johnson, was the perfect complement to James. A former nurse turned stay-at-home mom, she was known for her kind heart and her involvement in various community projects. She volunteered at the local hospital, organized fundraisers for the children's school, and was always ready with a home-cooked meal for anyone in need. Her love for James and their children was evident to anyone who saw them together, making the events that would unfold all the more shocking. Our story begins on a crisp autumn morning in April. The jacaranda trees that lined Eucalyptus Drive were in full bloom, their purple flowers creating a picturesque canopy over the street. James woke up at 6 a.m., as he did every weekday, to the smell of freshly brewed coffee wafting up from the kitchen. Sarah was already up, preparing breakfast for the family, a routine they had perfected over years of married life. As James made his way downstairs, straightening his tie, he could hear the excited chatter of Emma and Liam at the breakfast table. Emma, at 12, was entering that tricky preteen phase, while 9-year-old Liam was still all boyish enthusiasm and energy. Sarah greeted James with a warm smile and a cup of coffee, just the way he liked it, strong with a dash of milk. "Big day today?" Sarah asked, her blue eyes twinkling with interest. James nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "Potential new client. Could be our biggest account, yet if we land it." Sarah leaned in and gave him a quick kiss. "You've got this, honey. They'd be fools not to sign with you." As James kissed Sarah goodbye and ruffled his children's hair, he had no idea that this ordinary morning would be the last moment of normalcy his family would ever experience. He climbed into his sleek black BMW, the envy of the neighborhood, and headed towards the city center, where his office was located. The drive into Melbourne's bustling central business district was uneventful. James listened to the morning news, his mind already racing with strategies for the upcoming client meeting. He pulled into the underground parking garage of the gleaming office building that housed Lawson Properties, gave a friendly nod to the security guard, and made his way to the elevator. As he settled into his corner office on the 15th floor, with its panoramic views of the city skyline, James felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. He had built this business from the ground up, and now, at 42, he was at the top of his game. Little did he know that his entire world was about to come crashing down around him. It was just after 9 a.m. when the email arrived. James was reviewing some property listings when he heard the soft ping of a new message. Glancing at his computer screen, he noticed an email from an unfamiliar address, truth.revealer@anonymail.com. The subject line read simply, "The truth about your wife." At first, James assumed it was spam and was about to delete it, but something, call it intuition or fate, made him pause. With a slight frown, he clicked on the email. The message inside was brief and cryptic. "Your wife is not who you think she is. The truth lies in safety deposit box number 247 at Melbourne Central Bank. Open it, and your eyes will be opened." James stared at the screen, his heart beginning to race. Who could have sent this? And what could it possibly mean? Sarah was an open book. They shared everything, didn't they? As much as he wanted to dismiss the email as a prank or a mistake, a seed of doubt had been planted in his mind. For the next hour, James tried to focus on work, but the mysterious email kept intruding on his thoughts. He found himself rereading it multiple times, analyzing every word. By 10:30, he couldn't take it anymore. He called his assistant and asked her to reschedule his appointments for the day, citing a family emergency. As he drove to Melbourne's central bank, James's mind was in turmoil. Part of him felt guilty for even entertaining the idea that Sarah could be hiding something from him. They had built a life together, shared their deepest secrets, fears, and dreams. But another part of him couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there might be some truth to the email's ominous message. The bank was busy when James arrived, filled with the usual mix of business people and everyday customers. He waited impatiently in line, his foot tapping nervously on the polished marble floor. When he finally reached the teller, a young woman with a friendly smile, he requested access to safety deposit box number 247. "Of course, sir," the teller said. "May I see some identification?" James fumbled with his wallet, his usually steady hands now trembling slightly. He produced his driver's license, and the teller examined it carefully before nodding. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Please follow me." She led him to a secure area in the back of the bank, where rows of safety deposit boxes lined the walls. The teller used her key to open the outer lock, then stepped aside to allow James privacy. With a deep breath, he inserted his own key and opened the box. Inside, he found a stack of documents. As he began to leaf through them, his world tilted on its axis. There, in black and white, was a marriage certificate, but it wasn't his marriage certificate to Sarah. This document, dated 3 years before his own wedding, bore the names Sarah Johnson and Michael Lawson. James felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. He read the certificate again and again, willing the names to change, but they remained stubbornly the same. Sarah, his wife, the mother of his children, had been married to his own brother, and neither of them had ever breathed a word of it to him. But the revelations didn't stop there. As James dug deeper into the box, he found more documents. Bank statements showing regular transfers from Sarah to Michael, dating back years. Photos of Sarah and Michael together in various locations, looking far more intimate than a sister-in-law and brother-in-law should. And most damning of all, a series of love letters exchanged between them, the most recent dated just a month ago. James's mind reeled as he tried to process this information. How long had this deception been going on? Had Sarah ever truly loved him, or had he simply been a convenient cover for her relationship with Michael? And what about his children? Were they even his? With shaking hands, James gathered all the documents and shoved them into his briefcase. He thanked the teller mechanically as he left the bank, his mind a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and heartbreak. He got into his car but didn't start it, simply sitting there in the underground parking garage, trying to make sense of his new reality. Hours passed as James sat in his car, reliving every moment of his relationship with Sarah and Michael through this new, horrifying lens. The way Sarah always seemed so comfortable around Michael, the inside jokes they shared, the times he'd come home to find them laughing together in the kitchen. Had it all been a cruel charade? As the initial shock began to wear off, anger started to bubble up inside James. He had given Sarah everything, his love, his trust, his name. He had worked tirelessly to provide a beautiful life for her and their children. And all this time, she had been betraying him with his own brother. If you're feeling as shocked and betrayed as James right now, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next in this unbelievable true crime story. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city, James made the fateful decision to confront Sarah. He started his car and drove home, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. The usually pleasant drive to the suburbs now felt like a journey into the heart of darkness. When he arrived home, the house was quiet. Emma and Liam were at their after-school activities, and Sarah's car was in the driveway. James took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation to come. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The smell of cooking wafted from the kitchen. Sarah was preparing dinner, just as she did every evening. For a moment, the familiar scent and the sight of their home, filled with family photos and mementos, made James doubt everything he had discovered. How could this warm, loving environment be built on a foundation of lies? He found Sarah in the kitchen, humming softly as she stirred a pot on the stove. She looked up as he entered, her face breaking into a smile that now seemed sinister to James. "James, you're home early," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Is everything okay?" The words caught in James's throat as he stared at the woman he thought he knew. The woman he had loved for 15 years. The woman who had apparently been lying to him for even longer. "How long?" he finally managed to choke out. Sarah's smile faltered. "What do you mean?" James slammed his briefcase on the kitchen counter and began pulling out the documents. "How long have you been lying to me?" he shouted, his voice rising with each word. "How long have you and Michael been laughing behind my back?" The color drained from Sarah's face as she realized her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. "James, please," she pleaded, reaching out to him. "It's not what you think. Let me explain." But James was beyond reason. 18 years of memories flashed before his eyes, each one now tainted by the knowledge of this betrayal. In a moment of blind rage, he grabbed a knife from the counter. "Explain what?" he snarled. "Explain how you've been married to my brother this whole time? Explain the money you've been sending him? Explain these?" He threw the love letters at her feet. Sarah's eyes widened in terror as she saw the knife in James's hand. "James, please, put that down," she begged, backing away slowly. "Think about Emma and Liam. We can talk about this." The mention of their children only fueled James's anger. "Are they even mine?" he demanded. "Or are they Michael's?" "Of course they're yours," Sarah cried. "James, I love you. What Michael and I had, it's in the past. Please, let me explain everything." But James was beyond listening. In a frenzy of emotion, he lunged forward with the knife. Sarah screamed and tried to dodge, but she wasn't fast enough. The knife plunged into her abdomen once, twice, 3 times. As Sarah collapsed to the kitchen floor, her blood spreading across the pristine tiles, the reality of what he had done came crashing down on James. He dropped the knife, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "Sarah?" he whispered, kneeling beside her. "Oh God, Sarah, what have I done?" But Sarah couldn't respond. Her eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling as her life ebbed away. James cradled her body, sobbing uncontrollably, the front of his shirt becoming soaked with her blood. In a daze, James reached for his phone and dialed 911. "I need an ambulance," he said, his voice hollow. I've killed my wife." The next few hours passed in a blur. Police and paramedics swarmed the house. James was handcuffed and led away, catching one last glimpse of Sarah's body being zipped into a black bag. He could hear the confused, frightened voices of Emma and Liam as they returned home to this nightmare. As he sat in the back of the police car, James felt as if he was watching someone else's life unravel. How had it come to this? How had one email, one terrible secret, destroyed everything he held dear? But the story was far from over. As investigators dug deeper into the case, they uncovered a truth even more shocking than the initial revelation. A truth that would challenge everything James thought he knew about his wife, his brother, and the nature of love and sacrifice. If you think this story couldn't possibly get any more intense, you're in for a surprise. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the mind-blowing conclusion to this true crime saga. In the days that followed, as James sat in a cold, sterile jail cell awaiting trial, the full story began to emerge. Detectives interviewed Michael, who was devastated by Sarah's death and initially uncooperative. But as the evidence mounted, he finally broke down and revealed the truth. Sarah and Michael had indeed been married, but it wasn't a love match as James had assumed. They had been forced into an arranged marriage by their strictly traditional families back in their home country of Lebanon. Both had come to Australia seeking a fresh start and a chance at true love. When Sarah met James, she felt deeply in love for the first time in her life. Torn between her duty to her first marriage and her desire for happiness, she made the agonizing decision to keep her past a secret. Michael, who had also found love with someone else, agreed to keep quiet for the sake of his brother's happiness. The money transfers that James had discovered were not evidence of an ongoing affair, but rather payments to Michael to keep him silent. The recent love letters were actually old ones that Michael had threatened to expose if Sarah didn't continue to pay him. As for Michael's constant presence in their lives, it was motivated not by a secret relationship with Sarah, but by a deep-seated guilt and a desire to be close to the family he felt he had wronged. The anonymous email that had triggered the tragic chain of events, it had come from Michael's jealous ex-girlfriend, Olivia, who had discovered the secret and sought revenge on both Michael and Sarah. As these revelations came to light, James was overwhelmed with a new kind of anguish. He had killed the woman he loved, destroyed his family, and ruined his own life, all because of a misunderstanding born from secrets and lies. The trial that followed was a media sensation. The story of the successful real estate agent who murdered his wife after discovering her secret past marriage to his brother captivated the nation. Every day, the courtroom was packed with spectators and journalists, all eager to hear the latest twist in this tragic tale. James's defense team argued for a charge of manslaughter rather than murder, citing the extreme emotional distress he was under at the time of the killing. They painted a picture of a man driven to the brink by a lifetime of lies and betrayal. The prosecution, however, portrayed James as a controlling, jealous husband who had always resented his brother's close relationship with Sarah. They argued that the discovery of the past marriage was merely the trigger for violence that had always been simmering beneath the surface. As the trial progressed, James sat silently in the dock, a shell of his former self. He had lost everything: his wife, his children, his business, his reputation. The once successful, charismatic man was now a broken, hollow-eyed figure, crushed by the weight of his actions and the unraveling of his entire life. The most heart-wrenching moment of the trial came when Emma and Liam were called to testify, now living with their maternal grandparents. The children were clearly traumatized by the loss of their mother and the knowledge that their father was responsible. Emma, showing a maturity beyond her years, spoke of a happy home life that had been shattered in an instant. Liam, still too young to fully comprehend the situation, simply asked when he could go home with his dad. Their testimony left not a dry eye in the courtroom, including James, who broke down for the first time since the trial began. The sight of his children, now strangers to him, brought home the full magnitude of what he had done. Michael also testified, providing a detailed account of the arranged marriage and the years of deception that followed. He spoke of his love for his brother and his niece and nephew, and the torment he had endured keeping the secret. His testimony was a study in contrast, at times defensive of his actions, at others racked with guilt over his role in the tragedy that had unfolded. As the trial neared its conclusion, the jury was left to grapple with a complex web of lies, cultural expectations, and fatal misunderstandings. After 3 days of deliberation, they returned with their verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. James was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20. The sentencing brought little closure to anyone involved. The Lawson family was irreparably shattered, with 2 young children left to grow up without their parents. Michael, ostracized by both his Australian friends and his Lebanese family, retreated into isolation. And James, once the picture of success, now faced decades behind bars, haunted by the knowledge that a moment of rage had destroyed everything he held dear. In the years that followed, James struggled to come to terms with his actions and the cascade of events that had led to that fateful day. Prison life was a harsh adjustment for a man who had once lived in the lap of luxury. The stark concrete walls and iron bars of his cell were a constant reminder of how far he had fallen. At first, James was consumed by anger and denial. He lashed out at guards and fellow inmates, earning himself frequent stints in solitary confinement. The once charismatic businessman became a sullen, volatile presence in the prison yard. But as the months turned into years, the reality of his situation began to sink in. It was during his third year of incarceration that James had a breakthrough. A new prison counselor, Dr. Evelyn Chun, took an interest in his case. Unlike previous therapists who had tried to work with James, Dr. Chun didn't push him to talk about the crime immediately. Instead, she encouraged him to speak about his childhood, his relationship with Michael, and his early years with Sarah. Through these sessions, James began to unravel the complex web of emotions that had led to his violent outburst. He spoke of the pressure he had always felt to be the successful older brother, the provider, the perfect husband and father. He talked about the deep-seated insecurities that had always lurked beneath his confident exterior. "I think," James said during one particularly emotional session, "that part of me always feared that Sarah would leave me for someone better. When I found out about her past with Michael, it was like all my worst fears had come true at once." Dr. Chin nodded, and in that moment of fear and anger, you lashed out. James buried his face in his hands. "I destroyed everything. My whole life, Sarah's life, my children's lives, all because I couldn't control my anger for one moment." This realization marked a turning point for James. He threw himself into anger management courses and group therapy sessions. He began to mentor younger inmates, sharing his story as a cautionary tale about the destructive power of unchecked emotions. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, Emma and Liam were struggling to rebuild their lives without their parents. The first few years were incredibly difficult. They were shuttled between relatives, never quite feeling at home anywhere. The whispers and stares of classmates and neighbors followed them wherever they went. Emma, always the more resilient of the two, threw herself into her studies with a single-minded determination. She skipped 2 grades and was accepted into a prestigious private high school on a full scholarship. But beneath her academic success, she grappled with deep-seated trust issues and a fear of intimacy that would follow her into adulthood. Liam had a harder time coping. Quiet and artistic, he retreated into himself, spending hours drawing intricate, often disturbing images. His grades slipped, and he began to act out in school. By the time he was 14, he was experimenting with drugs and alcohol, desperate to numb the pain and confusion he felt. It was during this tumultuous time that Emma, then 16, made a decision that would alter the course of both their lives. Despite the objections of their grandparents and their mother's family, she reached out to James in prison. Her first letter was brief and guarded. "Dear Dad, I don't know why I'm writing this. Part of me hates you for what you did to Mom, to our family. But another part of me misses a dad I remember. I don't know if that dad still exists or if he ever really did. I guess I'm writing to find out. Emma." When James received the letter, he broke down in tears. It was the first contact he'd had with his children since the trial. With trembling hands, he penned a response. "My dearest Emma, I can't express how much it means to me to hear from you. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness or to have any place in your life. What I did is unforgivable, and I will carry that guilt with me for the rest of my days. The dad you remember, the one who read you bedtime stories and taught you to ride a bike, he is still here. But he's also the man who did a terrible, unforgivable thing. I'm trying every day to be a better person, to understand why I did what I did, and to ensure I never lose control like that again. I think about you and Liam every day. If you're willing, I would love to hear about your lives. But I understand if this is too painful or if you need more time. All my love, Dad." This exchange marked the beginning of a cautious correspondence between James and Emma. At first, their letters were infrequent and guarded. Emma shared surface-level details about school and her hobbies, while James talked about the programs he was involved in at the prison. As the years passed, their communication deepened. Emma confided in James about her struggles to connect with others, her fear of ending up in a relationship like the one that had destroyed their family. James, in turn, opened up about his therapy sessions and the hard work he was doing to understand and manage his emotions. Liam, however, wanted nothing to do with James. When Emma told him about her correspondence with their father, he flew into a rage. "How can you talk to him?" he shouted. "He killed Mom. He destroyed our lives." Emma tried to explain her conflicted feelings, the need to understand and possibly forgive, but Liam wouldn't hear it. This disagreement drove a wedge between the siblings that would take years to heal. As James approached his 20th year in prison, he received another letter. This one was from Liam, now a talented artist in his own right. The letter was short, but it meant the world to James. "Dad, I've spent most of my life hating you for what you did, but I'm tired of hating. I'm ready to listen, to try to understand. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you fully, but I want to try to move forward. Emma tells me you might be up for parole again soon. If you get out, I'd like to meet with you, to talk face to face, man to man." Liam, with trembling hands, James folded the letter and held it to his chest. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start, a chance to begin healing the deep wounds that had torn his family apart 2 decades ago. As his parole hearing approached, James felt a mix of hope and trepidation. He had worked hard on his rehabilitation, but he knew that the nature of his crime meant that freedom was far from guaranteed. The day of the hearing arrived, and James found himself once again facing the parole board. This time, both Emma and Liam were present. They sat quietly at the back of the room, their presence a silent testament to the complex journey their family had undertaken. James, now in his early 60s, his hair completely gray and his face lined with the weight of his experiences, spoke with a quiet dignity. 20 years ago, I committed an unforgivable act," he began. "I took the life of my wife, the mother of my children, in a moment of blind rage and betrayal. There is no excuse for what I did, and I will carry the weight of that action for the rest of my life." He paused, his eyes flickering briefly to his children before continuing. "During my time here, I have dedicated myself to understanding the root causes of my actions, to developing the tools to manage my emotions, and to helping others avoid the devastating mistakes I made. I've led anger management groups, mentored younger inmates, and worked to create positive change within these walls." James went on to detail his plans if granted parole, his intention to work with domestic violence prevention programs, to continue his therapy, and to slowly, cautiously attempt to rebuild some kind of relationship with his children, always on their terms. The parole board listened attentively, asking probing questions about James's rehabilitation and his plans for the future. They also heard from Emma and Liam, who both spoke of their conflicted feelings, their anger and pain over what James had done, but also their recognition of the work he had done to change. After deliberation, the board announced their decision. James would be granted parole under strict conditions. He would be required to wear an ankle monitor, attend regular therapy sessions, and work with a parole officer. Any contact with his children would need to be approved and supervised. As James stepped out of the prison gates a week later, he felt overwhelmed by the world he was re-entering. The city had changed in the 2 decades he'd been away. New buildings had sprung up, technology had advanced, and he felt like a stranger in a place he once knew so well. Emma was there to meet him, her face a mixture of emotions. "Hi, Dad," she said softly. "Are you ready?" James nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. As they drove away from the prison, the car filled with an awkward silence. Finally, Emma spoke. "I've arranged for you to stay at a halfway house for now," she said. "It's part of a program for newly released inmates. They'll help you find work and adjust to life outside." James nodded. "Thank you, Emma, for everything. I know this can't be easy for you." Emma's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "It's not," she admitted. "Part of me is still so angry, Dad. But another part hopes that maybe we can find a way forward." The first few months of James's freedom were challenging. He struggled to adapt to the fast pace of modern life, to navigate a world that had moved on without him. The stigma of his crime followed him, making it difficult to find work or build new relationships. But James persevered. He found a job at a local community center, working with at-risk youth. He attended his therapy sessions diligently and threw himself into volunteer work with domestic violence prevention programs. Slowly, he began to rebuild a life for himself. His relationship with his children remained complicated. Emma made an effort to see him regularly. Their meetings often filled with difficult conversations about the past and cautious hopes for the future. Liam was more hesitant, but true to his word, he agreed to meet with James a few months after his release. Their first meeting was tense and emotional. They met in a quiet corner of a local park, both men visibly nervous. "You look well," James said awkwardly, taking in the sight of his son, now a grown man with artistic tattoos peeking out from under his sleeves. Liam nodded stiffly. "Thanks," he said. "You look older." There was a long pause before Liam spoke again. "I've been angry for so long," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "At you, at Mom, at Uncle Michael, at the world. I've carried that anger for most of my life, and I'm tired, Dad. I'm so tired." James felt tears welling up in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Liam," he said softly. "If I could go back and change what happened." "But you can't," Liam interrupted. "None of us can. We have to live with what happened. And I'm trying to figure out how to do that without letting it consume me anymore." They talked for hours that day, delving into painful memories and raw emotions. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was a necessary one. As they parted, Liam hesitated for a moment before giving his father a quick, awkward hug. "I'm not ready to have you fully in my life yet," he said, "but I'm willing to try, to see if we can build something new." Over the next few years, James worked tirelessly to prove himself worthy of the second chance he'd been given. He became a respected member of his community, known for his work with troubled youth and his advocacy for restorative justice programs. Emma, now a successful psychologist, often collaborated with him on projects related to family trauma and healing. Their relationship, while still complicated, had grown into one of mutual respect and cautious affection. Liam's journey was more turbulent. He struggled with substance abuse issues for a time, the weight of his family's tragedy driving him to seek escape. But with the support of Emma and, surprisingly, James, he found his way back. His art became his outlet, his paintings a raw and powerful exploration of pain, forgiveness, and healing. 5 years after James's release, the Lawson family faced another pivotal moment. Emma, now married and expecting her first child, invited both James and Liam to a small family gathering. It would be the first time in over 25 years that they would all be together in a family setting. The evening was a roller coaster of emotions. There were moments of tension, old wounds threatening to reopen, but there were also moments of laughter, of shared memories of Sarah that were untainted by the tragedy that had torn them apart. As the night drew to a close, Emma stood up, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "I have something I want to say," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "This baby, your grandchild, we've decided to name her Sarah." The room fell silent. James felt his heart constrict, a mix of pain and profound gratitude washing over him. Liam, sitting across the room, let out a choked sob. "Are you sure?" James asked softly. Emma nodded, tears in her eyes. "Mom's death will always be a part of our story," she said. "But so was her life, her love for us. I want my daughter to know about the grandmother she'll never meet, about her kindness, her strength, her capacity for love." She took a deep breath before continuing. "And I want her to know about forgiveness, about how even the deepest wounds can heal if we're brave enough to try. Our family's story isn't just one of tragedy. It's also one of resilience, of the power of love to endure even in the darkest of times." James couldn't speak past a lump in his throat. Liam stood up and walked over to Emma, enveloping her in a tight hug. After a moment, he reached out and pulled James into the embrace as well. They stood there, the three of them, holding on to each other and to the promise of a future that, while forever marked by the past, was not defined by it. In that moment, James felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in decades. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely. The pain of what he had done would never fully fade. But it was acceptance, a chance to move forward, to be a part of his family's life again. As James left that night, he paused on the porch, looking up at the star-filled sky. "Sarah," he whispered, thinking of his late wife and his unborn granddaughter who would carry her name. "I hope you can see this. I hope you know how much you are loved, how your love continues to shape us all." In the years that followed, the Lawson family continued their journey of healing. It wasn't always easy. There were setbacks, moments when the weight of the past threatened to overwhelm them. But they persevered, bound together by a shared history and a cautious hope for the future. James became a doting grandfather, his interactions with little Sarah supervised, but filled with love. Liam found success as an artist, his work speaking to those who had experienced trauma and loss. Emma continued her work as a psychologist, using her family's experience to help others navigate the complex journey of healing and forgiveness. Their story became known in their community and beyond. James was often invited to speak at schools and community centers, sharing his cautionary tale and the hard-won wisdom he had gained. Emma and Liam sometimes joined him, offering their perspectives on the long-term impact of violence and the possibility of redemption. On the 20th anniversary of Sarah's death, the three Lawsons stood together at her grave. They were joined by Emma's husband and young Sarah, now a curious 5-year-old with her grandmother's kind eyes. As they laid flowers on the grave, James spoke softly. "Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I will never stop being sorry for what I did, but I want you to know that your love, your spirit, lives on. In our children, in our granddaughter. You are still shaping us, still teaching us about love and forgiveness." Emma squeezed her father's hand, while Liam rested a comforting hand on his shoulder. Young Sarah, not fully understanding the weight of the moment, but sensing its importance, placed a small, colorful drawing next to the flowers. "This is for you, Grandma Sarah," she said solemnly. "Daddy says you like to draw too." As they turned to leave the cemetery, James felt a complex mix of emotions: grief for what was lost, gratitude for what remained, and hope for what was yet to come. Their family's journey was far from over. The echoes of that tragic day would always be with them. But they had found a way to move forward together, their bond strengthened by the very trials that had once threatened to destroy them. The Lawson family's story serves as a powerful reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked emotions and the corrosive power of secrets. But it is also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the capacity for change, and the enduring power of love and family bonds. As they walked away from the cemetery, young Sarah skipping between her mother and uncle, James felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew that he would spend the rest of his life trying to atone for his actions, to be worthy of the second chance he had been given. But for the first time in decades, he also felt hope. Hope for his family's future, hope for healing, hope for redemption. Their story, like so many in the annals of true crime, is a reminder of the complexity of human nature, the fragility of trust, and the far-reaching consequences of our actions. It is a call for empathy, for understanding, and for the courage to face the truth, no matter how difficult it may be. For those who have followed this tragic tale, let it serve as a reminder to cherish our loved ones, to communicate openly and honestly, and to remember that even in the darkest of times, there is always the possibility of redemption and healing. As we close this chapter of the Lawson family story, we are left to ponder the twists and turns of fate that can alter lives in an instant, and the long, arduous journey of piecing together what remains in the aftermath of tragedy. Their story, though unique in its details, echoes the struggles and triumphs of countless families who have faced unimaginable challenges and emerged, changed but unbroken, on the other side. In sharing their story, we honor the memory of Sarah Lawson, acknowledge the pain of all those affected by this tragedy, and bear witness to the resilience of the human spirit. May their journey serve as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the power of truth, forgiveness, and the enduring bonds of family.